And just when you thought Sex Education couldn't get any more awkward, Season 2 comes along. So Sex Education Season 2 continues the story of Otis Milburn, played by Asa Butterfield, and in this season we are seeing him continue his story from Season 1, where he has now mastered his ability to you-know-what, and with that is having to balance his relationship with his new girlfriend Ola, and also the re-arrival of Maeve. Meanwhile, the school is going through a bit of a chlamydia outbreak. So the first season of Sex Education I watched very recently on Netflix, and it was always a show I wanted to watch because I thought it was something I would enjoy, but I didn't expect for it to be as good as it was. It was genuinely great, and I was really happy with where it went. And when we got a Season 2, I was very excited about it, even though I hadn't even seen Season 1 yet when Season 2 came out, and that was only a couple of weeks ago. I was still very excited about it. So going into Season 2, I watched it all yesterday, and I did it all in one sitting. And that is a really big ringing endorsement that I can give this season of Sex Education, because I'm not very good at binging stuff. I'm not very good. I just find it difficult to binge. But I sat through all 8 episodes of this season basically in one sitting, and I was just absolutely hooked from start to finish. So if that doesn't tell you how good the season was, I don't really know what will. Also, spoilers ahead for this season. I think it's been out a little while. Obviously, this review is a bit late in comparison to most people. In fact, it's very late. So I will warn you, there are going to be spoilers in this, because I think it's quite difficult to talk about a show like Sex Education without talking about spoilers, because this show is obviously a bit more comedy and drama based than a lot of Netflix shows. So there isn't really much plot to talk about, it's more about the characters specifically. So that's what I'm really going to focus on in this review. So Otis, played by Asa Butterfield, is once again great in this season. I do believe this is Asa Butterfield's best work. While I've not seen absolutely everything that he's done, I have seen him in a few things here and there, and this is easily the standout role for me with him. I just think he's very good as Otis. Like, it's genuinely believable, his character, like the way he acts, the way he kind of walks around, the way he holds himself. It's just very realistic and also very relatable and believable. You know, as someone who obviously went to a British high school and stuff like that, was in that environment, it is very real. And while I don't think it's quite as raw and as real as something along the lines of like The In-Betweeners, obviously this has a bit more of a over-the-top comedic element to it, it's still very realistic, and I find many things in this show with the character of Otis that do very much feel relatable and realistic to British high school. And Otis's story in this is very interesting, because obviously now he's actually finally managed to masturbate, he's figured out how to do that, and he is just kind of running away with it. You know, he doesn't really know how to handle himself. And on top of that, he has this conflict between him where he has his new girlfriend Ola, who of course we saw in the first season, and now with the arrival of Maeve coming back into his life, he's kind of stuck in this kind of situation of not knowing who to be with and who to spend his time with, who to prioritize, and it's kind of this back and forth, which is very interesting and also, again, very realistic, because the way they kind of play it, especially when you get to the end of the season, you have obviously Ola basically forcing him to make the decision of, oh, you have to choose between me and Maeve. And that was really, again, interesting. It felt harsh as well, but again, very realistic and very interesting to watch. And having to see Otis kind of being, you know, particularly in the first season, he was kind of the master of everything. You know, he knew everything. He was completely understanding of everything within the sexual world. But in this season, when it comes to him himself, he's actually incredibly unsure and realizes he basically knows nothing. And I thought that was a really good way to take the character. And speaking of Ola, she gets a much bigger role in this season, as you would imagine. She is now basically what you would consider on a network show a regular role, and she is really great in this as well. I really liked her character. Her personality is great. Again, I did find her towards the end of the season to be kind of annoying just because of the way she treated Otis. As I said, she basically forces him to choose between her and Maeve, which I think is a really bad situation, because it's not even like him and Maeve are together in this season remotely. Like, they kind of spend a lot of the season apart, to be honest. Whereas in the first season they're kind of together most of the time, whereas for this they don't really see each other that much in this season. But she has to force them to choose. But that's it's very interesting as well, because Ola has her own story in this in regards to self-discovery. Of course, she starts to realise that perhaps she is not into Otis as she first thought, and she is now actually starting to experience other things. Of course, she starts to think about Lily, she starts having dreams about her, and she also even starts to question about, you know, pansexuality and how that may come into her life and things like that. So again, her character and her story, while I feel like her personality does take a dip in this season, her story overall kind of makes up for it because, again, she really has some interesting stuff going on. And then we have Eric, who I think Eric was probably my favourite character coming out of Season 1. He has a great storyline in this as well. We have a new character, Raheem, coming in, who is this French exchange student who also happens to be gay and has a very close attraction to Eric, and them two have a really nice story together. And I really liked Raheem as a character. He was really nice, he was really sweet. I kind of hate what happens to him at the end of the season where Eric kind of blows him off for Adam, because he was just really sweet and he never did anything wrong to Eric, and I just thought it was really... I actually kind of didn't like Eric by the end of the season because, again, he has these decisions and he makes these choices that I just couldn't really justify with him, especially because he was such a realistic character in Season 1 in the sense that you were always on his side. In this season, I just couldn't fight for him because he just was making these wrong decisions. And I think Eric is an interesting character in this season because, again, he kind of has this thing where in Season 1 he was always on the same page as the audience. In this, he kind of goes against the grain, and I think that is something they had to do with the character in order to show his his dynamic nature. But it was just very strange to me that, I loved this character so much in Season 1, but by the end of Season 2, I kind of didn't like him that much at all.
You should wash your hands, you dirty pig.
And Adam Groff does make a return in the season, of course, after being kicked out of the school. He is now basically in a military school. And Adam, obviously, at the end of the first season, we kind of found out that he was actually experimenting with his sexuality. Perhaps his feeling that he has feelings towards men as well as women, or perhaps was more leaning towards men. In this season, we actually play with the idea a little bit more. Adam isn't as prevalent in this season as he was in Season 1. But Adam actually does have a really great story in this, because when he does come back into the story and when he kind of comes back into people's lives and people start realizing that he's around again, he has a really great story. And his ending, where they basically play with the idea of him being bisexual, I think was really nice, because again, it kind of plays with the idea that, not everybody, everybody's different. Everybody in this show is different. Everybody in the world is different. And, they kind of play with the idea in the first season and also for the bit of this season that, he's trying to figure out, oh, am I straight or am I gay? But then they actually realize, or, Adam realizes the fact that no, he's actually bisexual and he can be attracted to both. And I think that was a really, again, smart way to take his character, especially because by the end of Season 1, he kind of just goes off. We don't really know where it's going to go. But in this season, they really kind of confirm and settle down his character, and I think that was really nice. And again, they kind of ground his character and make him more likable and kind of more relatable and more human, which makes the character a lot more appealing overall. And Maeve returns as well in this season. Of course, we all knew Maeve was going to return, and Maeve, who was probably the general standout character of Season 1, Emma McKay, is really good in this role. I think that her character as well, I really cared about her in this season, because while I really cared about her in Season 1, her family aspect that comes into this season, where we see her mum return and of course her little baby sister-in-law, was really heartfelt, because you can see that, Maeve as a character, she had a troubled childhood, she didn't have a close relationship with her mother, and when her mother shows up just out of the blue back into her life, I really, really wanted things to go well for them, because I just felt like, Maeve, she's gone through so much in her life, she's had so much negativity throughout her life. I just wanted something good for her to happen, and obviously when it doesn't, it's a real shame, but I think it really shows Maeve's kind of independence and responsibility as a character who, eventually when she finds out that her mum is taking drugs again, she basically stepped up to the plate and, calls the authorities and makes sure that her little baby sister, who she does care for, is actually put in a place where she can be cared for properly, rather than being, left with a drug-abusing mother. So I thought that was a really good storyline for Maeve, because, again, Maeve didn't really have much to do in the season beyond that, because Maeve, while she is in the season, she's not quite as full front in the season as she was last season. But that storyline they gave her felt proper, and it felt real, and it really felt like they were giving her something that felt personal, and I liked that a lot. And probably the character last season that surprised me the most in regards to how much I liked him was Jackson. I didn't expect to like Jackson that much in Season 1, but I ended up really gravitating towards him, and I loved his story this season. I absolutely loved it. Like, his storyline of kind of, we saw it in Season 1 where he just is constantly living up to the expectations of his parents, where they just constantly want him to, to succeed and to just swim because that was their ambition, and they want to live that ambition through him. Particularly one of the mothers, more than the other, but they were really pushing him, and you really see that he's only really doing it for them. He isn't really doing it for himself. And the lengths that he goes to in the season, we eventually see him actually kind of self-harm in order to get himself out of swimming. He traps his hand in the weight, which causes him to break his arm, and so he can't swim anymore. And the way that kind of develops and goes on, and we see him start to explore other aspects of his life, like you know, he starts to realise that maybe I'm not the sports jock guy, maybe I can be in musicals and I can have other hobbies and I can do other things. And the way that ties into the storyline with Vivian, who gets introduced, is really cool. She was a really cool character, I liked her. Their little friendship that starts to develop there is really sweet. And I just think that Jackson is such a underrated character in this show because, again, he has so much depth to him, which I didn't expect him to have. And I think that his storyline, again, the lengths they go to with him to really show how he just wants to be his own person and be independent and things like that, which is something that I can relate to. It's just really, really good, and it's really well written, and I really liked it, and I think that the actor who plays Jackson is fantastic as well, so a really good season for Jackson as well. And I also want to talk about Amy. Now, Amy in this season is interesting because in the first season, she's obviously kind of the dumb blonde, and she's the, you know, but a lot of the jokes. And while she is still that in this season, at least in the first half, they give her an incredibly personal and incredibly important storyline, which I think was handled very well, because while I do feel like the incident on the bus where she's sexually assaulted is, you know, it's handled kind of for jokes in the beginning of the season, which I found off-putting, but then when you get to the end of the season, you actually realise that the reason they did that was actually kind of intentional, because they were trying to set up this thing that she was kind of deflecting it, because the entire season she's like, oh, it's fine, it doesn't matter, you know, I'm not bothered about it, and, you know, she's kind of acting like that. But then by the end of the season, you realise, no, she was actually seriously affected by this, and you kind of see how, you know, because you don't see that side of it until kind of the last few episodes, so it's kind of done in a way that feels intentional. So again, I can't really criticise it for that, because I do feel like the writers knew what they were doing there. You just have to wait for that payoff. Again, it can be a little bit risky, and I think some people might be turned off by that, if it, you know, at first. But what I will say is obviously just stick with it, because it does get paid off eventually. But her storyline, again, because she's a character who was very much a joke character, she wasn't really taken seriously in the first season. To give her a storyline like this was very, very needed. And I think that her storyline, the way it ties in with all the other female characters on the show, especially in episode 9, like, episode 7, where you kind of have all the female characters in the same room together, and the way that they kind of come together over it was really nice, and it was a really good moment to kind of bring them all together, because there's a lot of rivalry between the female characters in the show, so to bring them all together in this episode was really great. And I think that, you know, Amy's storyline was easily the most surprising and the most important of the season. But what about season 3? Sex Education has been renewed for a 3rd season, and I think, you know, a show like this is kind of difficult to talk about when it comes to a 3rd season, because it's not a typical narrative-driven show like something like, you know, I reviewed Altered Carbon recently. It's not like that. The thing with Sex Education is it's very much a comedy show above all else, so kind of each episode is a different thing, you know, and the only thing that really carries over is character arcs. So I think what's going to be nice to see is characters like Jackson, how he's going to carry on, what he's going to do next. Otis, obviously, Eric and Adam, how their storyline is going to carry on. It's a lot of that sort of stuff. So season 3 is going to happen. It has been confirmed, I believe. So we are going to see a season 3, and I'm very excited to see it. I'm very happy I caught up with this season, because again, it's a great show on Netflix. If you've not watched it, please check it out. It's really funny. It's really entertaining. It's a great binge. If I was able to binge it, you certainly will. So it's a really good season. Make sure you check it out. I loved season 2, and I'm going to give it a 9 out of 10. So have you guys seen the 2nd season of Sex Education? If you have, make sure you let me know all your thoughts about it in the comment section down below. Did you enjoy it? Did you not? Whatever you thought about it in the comment section, let me know. And as always, guys, if you want to see more movie reviews, TV reviews, and TV-related videos just like this one, be sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you don't miss an upload from me. And I hope to see you guys again next time.